So the first topic we're going to touch on is the law of supply and demand. And we're going to explore it from two perspectives. The first perspective is the law of supply and demand as it relates to an entire market. So it could be for NFTs, it could be for petrol, it could be for strawberries, whatever market that you like. And then the second perspective is the law of supply and demand as it relates to an individual NFT project. So we're going to start our journey into supply and demand by jumping into an overview of a couple of the key concepts. The first is markets, and the second principle is called the principle of voluntary exchange. So a market is a place where buyers and sellers meet to exchange goods and services. So in economic terms, it's generally used to describe an entire category of products or services. For example, the market for strawberries or the market for NFTs. And one of the key principles that explains the way that buyers and sellers interact inside of a market is called voluntary exchange. Ta-da! Now, voluntary exchange describes the process by which buyers and sellers voluntarily decide to make a transaction. To explain voluntary exchange in a little more detail, let's just use an everyday example like buying a punnet of strawberries. Now, let's say you go to a farmer's market and you buy a punnet of strawberries directly from the farmer for $5. So your perspective is that you value that box of strawberries more than the $5 you paid to get it. They look red, they look juicy, they look delicious, and you're happy to pay the $5. Now, the farmer, on the other hand, values the $5 cash more than that box of strawberries. So they've added up the cost to produce, pick, and pack, and they're also super happy with the $5. That transaction is a win-win because you got your strawberries and the farmer got his money. You both feel better off. And it's also pretty simple to see how the same principle applies to NFTs, right? And an NFT is for sale at 0.05 ETH, and the buyer values the NFT at more than the cost, and the NFT owner values that 0.05 ETH more than the NFT, then there's a win-win, and we have voluntary exchange. What's pretty amazing is how efficient this system is. Markets, as it turns out, have gotten really good at allocating and redistributing our scarce resources towards their most efficient use. So say, for example, a farmer produces too many strawberries, then the price will fall as sellers try to sell them off. Lower prices means less profit for strawberry farmers, and as a result, those farmers will have an incentive to go off and do something else. Maybe grow blueberries, for instance. But if farmers don't produce enough strawberries, buyers will drive the price up. And then the farmers will have an incentive to produce more, which will eventually lead to an oversupply, which then drives the price back down. Now, we're literally seeing the scenario play out in the market for NFTs in the last year. Between Jan and March of 2022, we saw the trading volumes rise from $100 million to reach an all-time high of nearly $1 billion a day. That's a 10x increase in demand in barely 2 months. At the very same time, the supply of new collections stayed constant at 200 to 250 collections per day. Now, this increase in demand and the lack of supply is what led to the massive bull run that we saw in the NFT market at the beginning of the year. The unfortunate thing is that NFT creators didn't react to this demand until nearly 2 months later. And then the number of collections being offered more than doubled. It went from 200 to 250 per day to 500 to 700 new collections per day. And it's astonishing that in one day, it reached an all-time high of 1,250 new collections being created in a single day. Based on the average collection at that time consisting of 10,000 NFTs, that would have been an inflow of 12.5 million unique NFTs in a single day. That's a massive increase in supply. But by the time NFT creators had responded to that earlier increase in demand, external market pressures drove the daily volumes back down. Demand had dropped to between 150 to $450 million per day. So now we have this case of a massive oversupply, and in the space of 4 months, the market had completely flipped. And to be honest with you, it hasn't really recovered ever since. The way that markets allocate and redistribute their resources is pretty freaking cool. And it's all based on information that economists call price signals. Now, price signals are a type of feedback loop from markets that tell us about their level of stability, how stable they are. They show when there are shortages or surpluses, where there is high demand and where more resources are required. If there is high consumer demand for a certain commodity like strawberries, a rise in price signal will show that the manufacturers need to up their production to meet this demand. And equally, if there is a surplus of strawberries from manufacturers, a decrease in price signal will encourage consumers to go out and buy more strawberries. It's pretty staggering to think that even in a market as volatile as NFTs, that the market's allocation and redistribution of its resources has acted precisely in line with the laws of supply and demand. The other thing that markets do successfully is that they incentivize the production of higher quality products. Like, for example, if the strawberries are brown and nasty, then no one's going to want to buy them. Or say the farmer's tractor that he's just bought is a hunk of junk. The strawberry farmer isn't going to go out and tell other farmers to go buy that brand. He's going to say, don't touch that brand with a 40-foot barge bolt. Again, we've seen this phenomenon play out in NFTs, with high quality projects are performing much better and at higher consistent levels than money grabs or low quality projects with poor utility or inexperienced teams. Ideally, the eventual result of voluntary exchange is that the seller can't make themselves better off without producing something that makes the buyer better off. That's a key principle. Okay, so now we understand the basics of how a market works. We understand the principles of voluntary exchange, and we've established how prices and profit determine how and where resources go. The next thing that we need to know is, where do prices actually come from? Like, who determines the price of my punnet of strawberries? To answer that, let's really dive into the law of supply and demand. If there's only one thing that you ever learn about economics, it should be supply and demand. And let's use the market for strawberries again to help us understand this concept in a little more depth. Take a look at this graph. Up here on the y-axis, we have the price of strawberries. And down here on the x-axis, we have the quantity of boxes of strawberries. Let's start by looking at buyers. Now, they respond to a change in price. So if the price goes up for strawberries, then some buyers will say, yeah, nah, I'm not paying that. I'm off to go buy some blueberries instead. The point is, they're going to buy less strawberries. Now, similarly, if the price goes down for strawberries, then people are going to buy more. And this principle is called the law of demand. When the price goes up, people buy less, and when the price goes down, people buy more. On our supply and demand graph, demand is shown by a downward sloping curve from left to right. Now, let's think about sellers, like the farmer in the farmer's market. If the price of strawberries goes up, then that farmer will make more profit, so they have an incentive to produce more strawberries. But if the price goes down, then they're not going to want to produce strawberries. That's called the law of supply. And on the graph, it's shown as an upward sloping curve from left to right. Now, what's really cool about the supply and demand graph is that we can use it to explore different scenarios. For example, let's put demand and supply together and look at a scenario where the price is really high, say $10. Now we have a scenario where the farmer would like to produce a lot of strawberries, but consumers won't want to buy them at this price. This mismatch is called a surplus. Now, if the price goes down for strawberries, let's say to $1, then buyers want to buy a whole lot of strawberries, but producers won't have the incentive to produce them. Again, you've got a mismatch, and this mismatch is called a shortage. Now, if we apply this theory to the example that we used earlier for the NFT market, in Jan and Feb of 2022, we had a market shortage, and that there were only 200 to 300 collections being launched a day, and a massive demand as volumes went as high as $1 billion per day. However, by the time the creators had responded to that demand, some 2 months later, and the number of collections launching per day rose to between 500 to 700, the market had flipped, and demand had gone down from the all-time high of nearly $1 billion a day to between 150 to $450 million per day. So now we had a massive market surplus. In very practical terms, this led to a lot of people that were still in the market investing in NFTs after the market downturn being left holding NFTs and collections that nobody wanted to buy. And we all know what happens when supply exceeds demand and we have a massive surplus, right? Yep, you got it. Prices go down and we find ourselves in the exact position that we're in right now. There's only one place where the quantity that buyers want is exactly equal to the quantity of sellers who want to sell. And it's right here in the middle where supply equals demand. Now, the price at this point is called the equilibrium price, and the quantity is called the equilibrium quantity. Now, at this point, you're probably thinking, okay, sure, this graph makes sense. But as we all know, the price of products and services don't remain the same. In fact, prices for all sorts of stuff are changing all the time, and external forces can both shift the supply and demand curves, changing that equilibrium price and quantity all of the time. For example, if we go back to strawberries, let's assume this graph shows the demand and supply of strawberries in the summer. But what happens in the winter? Will the change in weather affect the buyer's demand or the producer's supply? What do you think? Of course, the answer is that it's going to change the producer's supply because colder temperatures make it harder to grow strawberries. The result is the entire supply curve is going to move to the left. This is because no matter what the price, right, there is still going to be fewer strawberries produced. But enough about strawberries already. Let's look at a different market with a commodity that's known for its volatility, both because of fluctuating prices and how it's affected by external influences. Now, the product I'm talking about is gas. And if we rewind back to 2014, the retail gas price in the US fell dramatically. Why? Well, this was actually about supply and demand. The economies of Europe and China had gotten really, really weak, which decreased the demand for gas, and that shifted the whole demand curve to the left. But at the same time, new technology in the market and the restored production capability in Iraq and Libya caused gasoline to increase in supply, and that shifted that whole curve to the right. So demand went down, supply went up, and the combination drove gas prices down by 40% per gallon. Now let's relook at the current NFT market through a similar analytical lens for the year to date. We've seen a massive shift in demand from an all-time high in January of 991 million USD in a single day, go down to an average daily volume of approximately $31 million in September. That's a seismic shift in the demand curve to the left. Now, at the same time, supply had kind of remained relatively constant between March and July this year. However, in August and September, the number of new collections launching has jumped dramatically to new all-time highs. We've recorded 9 days across a 6-week period with over 1,000 collections being launched per day. The highest of all was on the 21st of August, when a new all-time high of over 3,080 collections launched in a single day. The upshot of this is that we have even greater seismic shifts of the supply curve to the right. This new all-time high occurred after 2 consecutive new all-time highs in a span of 11 days. All-time high supply coupled with all-time low demand has led to prices for even the most popular collections to decrease in value. This table shows the 10 most valuable collections sorted by their market cap for August. Now, the market cap in this case is calculated as the median price of the last 50 NFT sales multiplied by the number of NFTs in their collection. And as you can see, all of the top 10 most valuable NFT collections have decreased in value over the past 30 days, with an average decline of a massive 23.8% in ETH terms. This provides further evidence of how sensitive popular collections are to these laws of supply and demand. Now, in this case, current demand is shown by the volume traded in the collection. And as you can see, demand for the top 10 NFT collections, with the exception of Moonbirds, is down in the last 30 days. Moonbirds experienced an increase in demand after the Proof Collective, the company behind Moonbirds, announced a $50 million Series A funding round. Now, just in case you thought you were hearing things, let me summarize the current market conditions. At this very moment, demand is at a 12-month low, and supply has just reached a new all-time high. Now, knowing what you know about the law of supply and demand, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that this market is heading to some deep dark, and uncharted territory. And if you're thinking about launching a project right now, you probably need your head read, because there literally could not be a worse time in the history of NFTs to do it. If you're an NFT zealot, a little bit like me, the last couple of statements probably stung a little bit. It certainly tasted a little bitter leaving my lips. But love it or hate it, barring a few very, very rare exceptions, the law of supply and demand is a fundamental truth of economics that, as we've seen, is directly applicable, is the fundamental to the NFT market. The upside is that now we understand the law of supply and demand and how it works, we can use this information to our advantage to understand things like, when is the best time to launch our project? When is the best time to purchase an NFT? Through to how we can utilize these principles of supply and demand to orchestrate the best outcomes for ourselves, for our collective, and for the projects in our community.